Hello, and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
And I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister.
You know, Cameron, I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday about the care of things. And the phrase that she used was that there is a holiness in the care and the nurture of things. And I wanted to play that out with you for a minute to get your thought on what is it that we do with the stuff that we have. And usually when somebody asks a question like, what do we do with the stuff that we have? We're thinking about rampant materialism, how we have too much junk in our homes, how the landfills are being filled with our excessive plastic, yada, yada, yada. And that's a good conversation to have. But I would like to talk to you about the care of things as a spiritual discipline, I guess, of how do we treat the things that we own or that we create. And I'll give you a lead into where this question is coming from in my mind. So in the conversation that I was having with this lady, she was talking about caring for an elderly dog. And I was preaching somewhere and I had told a story about taking care of this little wren's nest in a shed. And so we're talking about the care for fragile and for vulnerable things. And so when she said there's a holiness in the nurture and the care of things, she said like our animals and our houses. And as I was thinking about that throughout the day, it's easy for me to have that vision. And I think I do have a rather robust theology built around. I mean, it's just straightforward from scripture that God cares how we treat our animals and how we treat the earth and how we treat other people. And so it's easy for me to have a theology of stewardship toward the things that God has created. I'm not sure that I have a robust theology of stewardship for the things that humans have created. And so therein lies the rub. Like, so you own a house, I rent a house. In my mind, it's easier to think about taking care of the house because it belongs to somebody else as an act of stewardship. It's easy for me to think about the way that I treat an animal, but it's much harder for me to think about like the way that I okay, so your coffee mug or your water bottle. So, you know, I think you can I'm betting you'll make a case here for, you know, the spiritual discipline or the part of your character that is formed in taking care of a house, or like, how far does this go, or how far can we push it, or to what degree can we learn something about who God is, who we are, what our character is like? How do we care for things? I have no idea where to even get a hold of this to go with it, but I'd love it if you could help me parse that out.
Well, I mean, part of the way I look at it is that our world is made in such a way where we have to take care of things. And so I take it that is by design. The Lord intends it that way. And so whether, you know, when it comes to the items that you have, that you own, I mean, let's take a home. If you do happen to, we do own our home. It's brought some challenges to me because I'm not a fix-it kind of person. I'm not very good with my hands, but it's been a great opportunity for me to be humbled by others who are able to teach me, but also to learn and also to recognize. I mean, there is a real joy and a value in maintaining something, and there is a real satisfaction that comes in making repairs and fixing something, but you also look at it in larger terms. And I think, you know, you could use the word love, which risks making this sound sentimental, and it sounds sometimes like a bit of an abstraction. So maybe we use a more homely word for a second, like service. When we bought the house, for instance, my wife and I were very, and we talked a lot about how we were going to use it for hospitality. So when you're thinking about it as a place of service to others, part of that maintenance is there to serve other people. You want to renovate the rooms and make sure that this is a home where people can stay and a place where you can serve people meals. I also have an aging dog and obviously, I mean, she's been entrusted into my care. I'm keenly aware of the way people will, you know, humanize and anthropomorphize their dogs. But she is I often say to my children when they're playing with the dog, her name's Magnolia, we can call her by her name, that, you know, this was, of course, Magnolia was made by God, and And as such, she's a creature, and that was made by the hand of God, and so we want to treat her with that kind of respect as well. But I think service is a big word there as well. But of course, I mean, character formation is built into the structure of reality. The more you look at it, and taking care of things does form us in an important way. I think, and I suspect you'll have a lot to say on this one, Nathan. My temptation is, I think, so let's set aside you already mentioned consumerism and all of that. So we'll bracket that for the time being. Let's just assume legitimate ownership where we have a healthy relationship with our things. But my temptation living in the suburbs is to just outsource all of the work. So I'll give you a for instance here. And you're very thrifty, you're very good with this kind of thing. There was a problem with my dishwasher recently. It was just a slight leak, very obvious, very normal problem. And it turned out when my father-in-law, who is very handy, it was over, once he peered under there and looked and was able to assess the problem, that all that needed to happen was a nut needed to be tightened. That was it. And he just explained very calmly. He said, instead of panicking and immediately calling somebody out to your house, all you really need to do is just this one quick maneuver, and just a basic item of maintenance, and easily solved. Now, obviously, it's not always the case, but I think the temptation for me is to I have this mental block, just thinking, well, somebody else can do this. I need to focus on other things. I can't do this. But it's really helpful, of course, to have my mind challenged and open to new strategies, and just to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are, but yeah, so really the two headings for me, Nathan, and I'm kind of just sort of forging my way ahead here as best I can. But yeah, the word service on the one hand, you want this to be an environment where you're able to serve others. And that includes your family, of course, by the way. We serve our children, we serve each other. But then also an arena in which to be challenged and to grow and to learn more about how to adapt and to be resilient. And yeah, just to keep growing, which is harder to do the older you get.
I wonder if there's a corollary to some of this, that to looping it back to the material culture, is that if you are a consumer, um, that has some economic value to it. I mean, that's what keeps our economy running. That you buy more. Where if you're nurturing and caring for things and making them last longer, maybe you take care of your car or your clothing or your shoes or your backpack, or whatever it is that you're using in life. You routinely do maintenance on the things that you have. That there is an anti-consumerism involved in nurturing and caring for things. Um, so there's that part of it. I get that. I see the acts of service element. There's an anti-entropy thing at play here. You think of God creating order out of chaos. Is that a communicable attribute? Not that we create new worlds out of the messes that arise in our refrigerators, but that is there something, back to Genesis, God puts them in the garden for the express purpose of caring for it. So the production and the caring and the nurturing, the husbandry, as it would be classically called, is an important part of. I think why this question is troubling for us is that we have, I think, in the last, and I don't know what the amount of time is, trended in a direction where we have separated out the material world from the spiritual world within Christianity in a way unlike it's ever been done before in human history. And now we don't know what to do with our things as part of our spiritual interaction. So you have this incarnational element where God affirms the goodness of the physical and sees the physical as a part of the plan of redemption. That's baked right into it. And so we have this theology that says that the physical is good, that there's a responsibility that we have to the world because the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. But at the same time, I get all of that, but I'm trying to wrestle with maybe a couple different ways. What is the Are there elements of our lives that genuinely have no spiritual application or meaning to them? Is there anything that isn't sacred to some degree? Um, and now I'm not talking about like the sanctity of life, but I'm saying, is there anything that truly doesn't matter
Hmm.
what you do with it? I know this is getting a little bit meta, but I almost
No,
have to start on
I
that
mean,
end in order to work back to some specific practices.
no, it's important for us, I think, as Protestants to say this because we do tend toward a bifurcated mindset where we do if we're not careful, we trend in a direction of over spiritualizing or the word no, not over spiritualizing, that's the wrong way to put it. Elevating the spiritual into insignificance. And that's the
Hmm.
phrase I fastened on in the book I wrote with my dad, Faith That Lasts. And that just basically means you separate the spiritual from everyday life. It's a totally artificial separation, by the way, and it's to
Hmm.
our detriment that we do that. No, in fact, your whole existence is shot through with significance and meaning and purpose. There's spiritual significance to all of your pursuits. One of the great tragedies of modern life is that feeling of meaninglessness and hollowness. And I think we've talked enough about this on the podcast, Nathan, to just say, I know it's been challenged in recent years. A number of books have said, hey, we've never really been disenchanted. We remain spiritually fascinated and preoccupied. And while that's true, I think we're spiritual creatures. We will always be spiritually preoccupied in some way. Disenchantment is real in the sense that many of us in our day-to-day lives do feel that most of our practical pursuits are essentially meaningless.
Oh, okay.
Now, that doesn't mean that you're going through an excess. Yeah, I'll leave it there for a
Yeah, yeah,
second.
yeah. Because that's very, very helpful. So I think I know a reason why we would be tempted in that direction as Christians. So let's take Cameron's phrase here of disenchantment. Um, and
Hmm.
there's a sense in which
Max
Christianity does.
Weber's phrase.
Yeah, there is a sense in which Christianity does this. Like, when you look at, um, who was it that said, like Christianity took the fairies out of the trees, for example, that that you have to
Oh,
have a
right.
certain
Yes, absolutely.
you
Yep.
have to have a certain level of disenchantment in order for the scientific process to work. You have to believe that there's a natural order to things that aren't animated by a spirit, like the apple falls off of the tree not because demons throw them down, but because of gravity. In one of those, you start asking
Hmm.
questions about the nature of physics, and the others is in the realm of mythology. So you have to disenchant reality to some degree in order to mathematically model it and do science, and we're on board with that, because the history of humanity, Cameron, is actually the opposite direction. That is a hyper enchantment where there's a god in every tree, and every single thing that
Hmm.
happens, you say bless you when you sneeze so a demon doesn't get into you, and you lay out sacrifices at night in the jungle for the gods to protect you from snake bites, and you do sacrifices for rain, and I'm just like, so
Hmm.
there's a sense in which
Yep.
this is why it's hard to walk down this line of saying, as a Christian, the material world has deep significance and I'm responsible for it without deifying it. So I think in the theological realm, they
Right.
talk about this of God creating ex nihilo out of nothing, not ex deo. And in the theologies where God creates out of
Hmm.
himself, then like everything that is created has like
Hmm.
fragments of the divine within it, which we don't believe. Um, but because God creates out of nothing, but then declares that it's good, the material itself has a high degree of value and is put here for a purpose, which therefore means that the way that I use the material is significant spiritually. How's that for running the lap?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people have pointed out, church historians in particular, have pointed to the fact that Christianity, from its onset, was accused of being atheistic
Right.
because it dismantled the rich pantheon of gods, hmm and yeah, it took away the hobgoblins and wood sprites and cleared the fairies out of the woods. Now, I mean, I think but now, if you look at our present day, America. The challenge, though, is to recognize, as Gerard Manley Hopkins said, that, in his poem, God's Grandeur, where we're told the world is charged with God's grandeur. And we lose sight of that sometimes because we tend to get lost in the world of our everyday affairs. And then it becomes in our minds, not in actuality, but in our minds, it's divorced from the spiritual world, and it loses spiritual significance. Once again, it's an artificial separation that's happening, though. I want to make that very clear.
Yeah.
And that's where I do think that the phrase practical atheism is very helpful there. And I'm not saying that we're accusing people of being atheists. I want to make that very clear, or unwitting atheists. I am saying that we often think like an atheist when it comes to the way we just live our daily lives, and that it's a very insidious process that creeps in there. But when we look at it from the perspective you've just recommended, Nathan, it becomes very obvious that, of course, there's a spiritual significance to the maintenance of your home. There's a spiritual significance to caring for an aging pet. Now, most people would recognize that there's a spiritual significance for caring for our, say, an aging parent or, an aging family member. We recognize that. There's spiritual significance for, restoring a car. But you have to recognize that all of your pursuits, what you're doing in your life. Now, so are the materials on the car in and of themselves spiritual? No, what's spiritual is what's happening to you in your heart as you do this. Your different pursuits and activities and your attitude in those pursuits is playing a formational role in your character. So that might be one way to look at it and one way to get a hold of this.
Yeah, Cameron, I'd be interested in your perspective on, is it your sense that there's been a bit of a phase shift even within evangelicalism in the last 10 years even, on whether or not caring for your body, like your own physical body, is a good thing spiritually or not?
Mm-hmm.
Because it seemed like, there's a point there like, it's kind of it's all going to burn up kind of mentality of like, well, God gave me this body and I'll use it up. And, I didn't hear a whole lot of like stewarding your health, even conversations. It didn't seem like 10 or 15 years ago, but I think the vast majority of Christians that I know now would have some sort of idea that this is a gift to you from God, and therefore you're supposed to honor God with your body, and maybe some routine maintenance and preemptive things is a good idea on your physical, because there was this sense of like, well, it's just a physical body. And then you start looking at what Jesus said, and you're like, no, nothing was ever just some, so I guess this topic that we're discussing here is interesting to me in saying, how far do you push that? Because like you said, caring for an aging person, caring for another person, to us seems obvious from a sanctity of life and a stewardship capacity. But if you look at the parables that Jesus taught, they were about like a man plants a vineyard and then comes back and cares what the vineyard is like. And that's a sign of the good steward. You know what I mean? Yeah. So here we're talking about a grapevine. We're not talking about, did you care for the elderly, which is biblical and that's elsewhere. But I'm just encouraging us to think broadly.
Well, let's think about it like this. Is Dallas Willard right? There's the Dallas Willard quote for those of you who have the TOL bingo card. Was he right when he said that eternity begins as soon as you start following Jesus, and that you have newness of life now? That's still that's a different paradigm for a lot of people. I think a lot of people do still take a little bit of a fire insurance policy approach to this, and they think, well, now my afterlife is locked down and secure. And in the meantime, I've got to hobble through this obstacle course of life here and see what I can do. But if it begins now, then you're training for spiritual reigning now. And so all of your pursuits are filled with that level of significance. But also, again, even physical health. So I do think that there's a shift happening here. And I do think it's a good one. I think more people are recognizing that your own physical health will affect profoundly those around you. And it will
Mhm.
also affect your ability to be able to serve those around you as well. And I think so now I'm seeing at least growing recognition among Christians that taking care of your home is a good thing, restoring a vehicle can be a good thing, a spiritual pursuit, and basic maintenance on the body is you, by the way. There's no part of the old, maybe one of the more unhealthy mindsets that you mentioned, Nathan, where people sort of were tempted to think, well, I'm just passing through. It doesn't really matter what I do with my body, which is the line of thinking. And I know everybody always brings up the Gnostics, but that is a line of thinking that it has a little bit in common with some Gnostic tendencies. There were two broad extremes that Gnostics were drawn to, by the way. One was hedonism, because they would say, well, the physical world is inconsequential. What matters is the spiritual and the secret, esoteric knowledge that we can gain hold of. So just throw your life away into dissipation. So there was that. Or the other extreme was extreme asceticism, because my body is insignificant. I bring it completely and totally under my own mastery. And so both of those are obviously not healthy responses. I do think that in certain Christian circles, a lot people would be tempted to go a hedonistic route, not in terms of they weren't going to nightclubs and visiting bad districts of towns and all that, but I think there was a lot of overeating and a lot of that kind of habit, and people would just say, well, does it really matter? Well, of course it does, because it matters,
Mm.
first of all, for your own character formation, but it also that will affect your lifespan. That will affect how you are able to care for other people and serve them. I remember, maybe Nathan, maybe you've brought this up to me, but have been numerous studies done on pastors who, and being a pastor is can be very challenging for your health, because your schedule is it's just pretty crazy. And it's very hard to make time, and you're always going to different functions, and you're always being given different, you're getting food that's not really great for you. So the lifespan of pastors is not a good one often, and very prone to heart disease and all of that. So I remember I've talked to a few people saying, what if pastors took, were given more incentive to take, charge of their health, they would be able to serve their congregations better and serve others better. So
Mhm.
I think there is growing recognition of that. I'm seeing a lot of positive changes there as well.
I,
But again, the recognition that none of this is without significance. And let's face it, eating in a disciplined way or exercising, any discipline that you implement can have a very positive outworking in your character. This can play a formational role in your life.
okay, so on our own bodies, I think that's an easy one because we say God made it. What then about the things that we make? And then there's like, well, we take care of the things that we make or that we have, or so. I mean, because some people are going to say, okay, yeah, I take care of my house because for acts of service, but that's based on what other people think. Or there's a culture of um, cleanliness is next to godliness, or that kind of thing. I guess one of a word in the back of my mind here comes is like craftsmanship. Um, I have a favorite cereal bowl
Well, you can
that
think about
my brother-in-law Ed made for me. So
sure,
it's different
yeah.
than all of the other mass-produced ones.
Hmm.
I'm a little more careful with it. So sorry. I
Well, we can also think about the arts here. I think
well,
that makes
see,
that's an easy one to call to mind.
but let me back you up just before you go on this, is because I would submit to you, and this is what I was thinking about while you're speaking, that the arts, biblically speaking, were in terms of craftsmanship. So you look at the gifts that were
Hmm.
given to, like,
Sure, yeah.
the skills to manipulate physical reality into useful and ornate things is seen as a God-given task with a spiritual purpose of
Hmm.
manipulating physical reality into things. That's my summary of the Old Testament
Well, let's think
art.
about. Yeah, no. So, I mean, I take your point on craftsmanship. There are certain items that are useful, but they are also well designed, and there's a joy that comes with using them. And there, dare I say it, there's an artistic, there's a beauty to that design as well, even though they're not intended as an artifact or a piece of art. Sometimes I also think that way about, if you go to a museum and you see ancient artifacts, a lot of them, we look at them and stick them on displays in museums, and we admire them and stare at them. But they were, in ancient cultures, these were objects of worship, and people viewed them in the same way that we would look at a hammer or a saw, these were tools. They weren't works of art in the sense that, hey, this is supposed to be an object of my contemplation. It didn't work like that. So there's a strange kind of, there's a strange mindset that sometimes creeps in when we have this discussion. But craftsmanship is a good way to look at it. But one way to tie this all together would be to draw from Tolkien's On Fairy Stories, where he describes us all as sub-creators. And that's very helpful. Now, he is deliberately reacting against the Romantic poets, people like Coleridge and Wordsworth, who used creator. You said we were creative and we are creators in an idolatrous sense, in the sense that they were saying essentially human beings make something genuinely new, almost ex nihilo. No, that actually was what they were saying. And he's pointing out, no. We have at our disposal, we are creatures, and we have at our disposal the field of what the Lord has created here, and all of the items here, and we can use those, but we are sub-creators. We didn't make any of this stuff directly. And so, again, when we look at works of art, or when we look at tools or items that we use that display a real degree of craftsmanship, we can recognize that we are exercising stewardship just as much as we are creativity, because these are items that are here for gift. Yeah.
Well, there's another part. Right? There's another, I think, God honoring element of craftsmanship, and that's diversity. So let's go back to your house, Cameron. When I drive through the neighborhood that you live in, you live in a neighborhood. There are a lot of, but your house is actually different than the houses beside. It looks different. And even in a suburb, many people, they have different trees, different flowers. There's something about their house that makes it look different. I've also driven through subdivisions where every single house looks exactly the same. The lawn is exactly the same. Nobody really lives there. They're kind of in and out. The only thing that seems to be different is the number on the house. It's easier for me to think of craftsmanship and stewardship and care for something that is uniquely under my jurisdiction, or like nobody else has something like this. Like nobody else has your dog named Magnolia until we start cloning them. And even then it's not going to be the same. So there's an additional level of responsibility to things that we have or that we make that are unique, I think, because it's a celebration of diversity. And then there's a responsibility that comes into it because like you are given the children that you are given, and nobody else has your children. And there's a sense in which I think that plays out even to, just pushing that. So in addition to craftsmanship as a God honoring exercise, I think I want to see a subset of that as kind of the beauty of diversity. Like that's what makes somebody a great painter, is because the stuff they make is unique. They bring good diversity into the world. Like you don't become another great painter to be able to paint just like somebody else did. That is counterintuitive. Like that's not how that works. Like that's not what makes you a good artist. So I think to this element of what are the things that have been uniquely entrusted to me, and therefore do I have a responsibility to care for this because this uniquely has been put within the realm of my influence.
Yeah. The creation mandate so much of what we do involves taking care of things. And so much of what we do involves basically some version of or species of gardening. And so, that bearing that in mind and recognizing when we recognize the spiritual significance that is inherent in all of our life and everything we do and all of our pursuits, then I think we'll begin to take better ownership of what we're doing, and also have a healthier relationship and recognize, hey, we are stewards, not to be, basically seduced by some sort of consumerism,
Yep.
but recognize that what we have is under our care and use it as, again, I sound like a broken record, as a form of service.
Well, I think too, Cameron, that also there might be, if we learn to think like this, there might be some distinguishing characteristics of the things that we choose to own in the first place. There's kind of the classic, like, no, we can't buy 15 puppies because we can't take care of them all. But let's take that out of the realm of puppies and add it into other things in life of saying, you know what, I'm not going to become the owner of this because I don't have the resources to care for it properly. So there also is a sense in which this can give us a moderating element and effect too on the types of projects we decide to take on, and the permanence or the craftsmanship or the diversity or the uniqueness of the physical world around us. So anyway, I think it's easy for us as Christians to see the value of the things that God has created from the physical world. It's easy for us to see the value of other humans, and other creatures and things that God has created. And I hope that this conversation, I'm not sure that I've laid out in my mind, like, here are 3 good principles to help me think through this. But hopefully for those of you listening and thinking along, this has challenged you to begin to think, we think that our time is sacred and that we have to give an account of every word that we have. And God clearly cares a lot about what we do with our time. But then what do we do with our stuff? How do we care well for our things in a way that does not idolize them, but stewards them well in a way that honors God and then opens us up for better acts of worship and better acts of service? And so if any of you can have figured out any good thoughts on that, please shoot them over to us at info@toltogether.com, and that can be a blessing to everybody. But thanks for wrestling around on this topic with us. You've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.